if you look at what the Russians are saying and you look at what the Iranians are saying and you look at what Tucker Carlson is saying, if they all the same, they're selling the same product, whether or not he's getting paid to do it. And he is getting paid. There's no two ways about it.
Why are people suddenly turning on Israel? That's a question a lot of people are asking right now, especially as this conflict expands. But here's the problem. Most of the conversation you're hearing is coming from people who haven't actually been there. So today, we're speaking with someone who has. Chuck Holton has spent years covering wars around the world. And since October 7th, he's been on the ground in Israel multiple times, documenting what's actually happening. And in this interview, we're going to challenge some of the biggest narratives, break down what's really driving this conflict, and ask a simple question. Are people seeing this clearly, or are they being misled? Chuck, welcome to our show. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it.
How serious is this moment right now with Iran compared to everything Israel went through since October 7th? And what does the next phase realistically look like in your estimation?
I mean, Syria for Israel in terms of this will change everything. And I think you could say the same for the United States. This is a once in a generation opportunity for the United States to make a change that will impact not just the Middle East, but the entire world, and especially the economies of the world. Because there's an inherent risk premium that's priced into almost everything because of the threat that Iran poses to the Strait of Hormuz.
Much of this conflict was always about Iran behind the scenes. Why are people underestimating what Iran represents?
I mean, obviously, some people are being misled as to what the threat that Iran represents. That's by design. The people doing the misleading are usually in the employ of some of Iran's allies, China and Russia. And so this is something that is not organic. It's not just people in the United States waking up to the fact that Jews control everything and that, stuff like that. Those are arguments that were designed for 18th century, 19th century Russian peasants who were illiterate. And those same arguments are coming back around to as fodder or as ammunition for the enemies of the West to attack the West all over again. Israel represents the West in so many ways, not just in the Middle East, but all across the globe. And so attacking Israel is sort of de rigueur for so many leftists and just Islamists, but I sometimes repeat myself. So I think that all of those organizations or countries, states, are pushing this narrative. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people in the United States that don't realize they're being influenced by that kind of propaganda. And it is propaganda. There's no question about it. There's so much just falsehood that's being bandied about social media, and it's getting harder and harder to tell the difference. I mean, with all the artificial intelligence stuff coming out, it's really difficult to tell the difference anymore. And that's why I think it takes people with a lot of experience. And if you really want to know what's going on, you got to go and be there on the ground. That's why I've been in Israel for more than 7 months during this conflict.
What do you have to say to people that say that, Trump was dragged into this war by Bibi and all that stuff?
I would say that you have not been reading your history if you think that, because, Iran has a special day, November 4th, set aside as Death to America Day. And they chose November 4th because that's the day in 1979 that they took the American hostages that were held for, 444 days or whatever it was, only were released when a strong president, that is Ronald Reagan, was elected and literally said, you had better release those prisoners by the time I take office, and I hope you don't, because if you don't, we're going to come over there and just absolutely make a parking lot out of your country. So that's just the beginning. There were more than 1,000 Americans that have been killed by Iranians over the intervening time period between then and now. In the Beirut barracks bombing, in Iraq and Afghanistan with all the explosively formed penetrators that were shipped into those countries by Iran. The kill squads that Iran has sent after President Trump more than once, and other high ranking officials like Oliver North and several others, and former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. They had attempted to assassinate Americans, and they had been successful at killing a lot of American soldiers and civilians over the last few years. So if you could say that there was no threat from Iran, you just don't know your history. And to the point that Bibi Netanyahu drug Trump into this, well, I think you're forgetting this little thing called October 7th that happened, because there was not war in the Middle East before that happened. And as it turns out, October 7th was planned and facilitated by Iran through its proxy network, Hamas. So we wouldn't have a war at all if it hadn't been for October 7th. That wasn't Bibi Netanyahu's fault. And so I think what it displays when people say that is just a deep-seated desire to try to make the United States and Israel the bad guys. And what is disturbing is that so much of that, I mean, we've always known that the hard left hates America, would love to see it all torn down, turned into some sort of communist utopia. But to see that coming from the right, and I think that has made me come to understand that the political spectrum is not a line where you have left on this side, right on this side, and everybody else somewhere on that spectrum. The political spectrum is more of a circle. And if you go too far to the right, you end up on the left, because we see these people in what I call the black pill right, or the halal right, who are parroting the same things that the hard left is saying, the code pink, and people like that are saying. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but suffice it to say, it's intentionally being fomented and facilitated by our enemies, by the enemies of America, including state actors like Russia and China.
Does Iran's strategy of targeting basically all the countries around it surprise you? I mean, it seems like they're trying to drag everybody into the war, which is unlike any other war that we've seen.
No, I think that they're doing that because they know that that's really the only option they have to put pressure to get President Trump to stop the war before it ends. What they're hoping is that by attacking energy infrastructure in the region, I mean, the number one country that's been attacked the most since February 28th is not Israel, it's the UAE. And so why are they attacking the UAE? We've got some troops there, but we don't have big bases in the UAE. So they can't claim that they're attacking American bases only. Why are they attacking the energy infrastructure, the tourism infrastructure of the UAE just mercilessly? Well, the reason is because they know the UAE can call President Trump and say, we've had enough of this, put a stop to this. And that's why they're hitting Qatar. That's why they're hitting Bahrain. That's why they're hitting Kuwait, et cetera, et cetera. So they want to ramp up the pressure on President Trump because they realize that the only thing that's going to save the Iranian regime right now is President Trump. It's getting President Trump to feel the heat so much politically that he chooses to stop the war before attaining victory. And they have I think, a real shot at actually being successful at that. This is how politicians operate. They want to make a point, so they send the military and they start fighting, but the political capital of losing American troops, spending American treasure overseas and things like that ramps up over time, gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And so they eventually get to the point where that pressure's too much, and then they just call it off. We saw that with Joe Biden in the pullout from Afghanistan. We saw that with Barack Obama in the pullout from Iraq, and also with attempting to stop the war in Afghanistan. He did that one time. I want to say in when was it? 2015. 2014, 2015, something like that. Barack Obama just announced that the war in Afghanistan was going to end on a certain date, but there was enough pushback because we weren't at a point at all where we could claim any kind of victory. And there were some cooler heads that prevailed and figured out that if we just take our toys and go home, then the Taliban wins. Because look, that's what it's called. If you leave the field of battle before the enemy's done fighting, that's called losing. However you like to frame it, the politicians in Washington are going to try to come up with some way of saying that that's a victory, but it's not. If the enemy still has fight in him, you lose if you leave. The only way to end a conflict in a just way is for the American army or American military to strike so hard and so consistently for long enough that the enemy begs you to stop and will take an unconditional surrender. That's the only way to actually win. And we haven't, unfortunately, the United States has not actually won a war like that since the invasion of Panama in 1989.
In your estimation, what do you think a victory would look like in this war?
The U.S. military and the Israelis as well have put out three sets of goals, sort of a minimalist goal, a medium-term goal, and a maximalist goal. They've already met the minimalist goal, which is to dramatically degrade Iran's ability to threaten its neighbors. They're right now kind of shooting for that mid-range goal, which is to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, ensure safety of navigation. And the maximalist goal would be actual getting rid of the regime completely. Now, President Trump, in the last conflict that he had in Venezuela, went for kind of the mid-range goal or even the minimalist goal of we took out Nicolas Maduro. Okay, let's call it a victory and quit while we're ahead, and that'll be it. But in reality, we took out Alibaba, but we left the 40 thieves in Venezuela. And so the plight of the average Venezuelan is not any better than it was. And if we had gone for the maximalist goal of actually regime change, it would have taken longer. It would have been more expensive. We probably would have lost some troops, but it would have ended with Venezuelans voluntarily leaving America and everywhere else they've fled to and going back to their own country. And then it would have, but we accepted sort of a mid-range deal where we can leave Delcy Rodriguez in power, where she's, every bit as bad as Nicolas Maduro. However, she's willing to work with us so that she doesn't get Maduro'd as well. And okay, we'll take that and call it a win. So apply that thinking, that logic to this war. It seems to me that President Trump at some point will just feel so much political pressure on him that he's going to just call it good wherever we happen to be at that point. And I really hope he doesn't. And I'm happy to see that the Israelis are kind of saying, we're going to prosecute this thing to the bitter end, and to see the government of Saudi Arabia, now MBS, talking to President Trump today and saying, we want you to finish the job. We don't want you to pull out early. Please don't do this halfway, because halfway is tantamount to losing. If we leave the regime in charge in any way, shape, or form, we will have to do this again. There will come a day we'll have to do it again. And so we might as well, if we're going to do it, let's, in for a penny, in for a pound. Let's go all the way.
Now, you've been on the ground in Israel multiple times since October 7th. What did you see that people still don't understand? What's the biggest gap between what you saw and what people still believe?
I think people in the United States that hear about the war, they hear the news about missile strikes every day, and you hear the news about people getting killed and things like that in Israel. And if you haven't been there, you would tend to believe, my goodness, there must be nothing but rubble left in Israel at this point. It must look like Gaza by now. And that's just simply not the case. We had, there are various pundits that haven't been to Israel who are saying things like that. During the 12-day war, I remember Colonel McGregor, Douglas McGregor, saying a third of Tel Aviv is destroyed. And I was in Tel Aviv, and I was like, wait, how come I can't find any damage? Like, even when I'm looking for it, I have a hard time finding it. So I think that just by the nature of news, which exists to report the out of the ordinary, that when the news reports the out of the ordinary of what's going on in Israel, if you haven't been to Israel, you don't have any context in which to place that news. So to you, the out of ordinary in Israel actually becomes the ordinary in your mind. and you think that it's all bombs, missiles, and bodies and things like that, and it's just not. Whenever I'm in Israel, I'm always surprised at just how. I mean, yeah, there's shelters and there's air raids, sirens that go off from time to time, and especially right now. But the restaurants are open, the hotels are open, the buses are running, people are going to school, they're going to work, they're walking their dogs and having ice cream on the sidewalk. So it doesn't feel like you're in a war necessarily. And I think that just speaks to the resiliency of the Israeli people.
Take me to one moment that really stayed with you since October 7th over there in Israel.
When I first got there and we were talking to people in southern Israel who had been at the Nova Music Festival or things like that, just the horrific nature really got driven home of what had actually happened. Talking to people from Kibbutz Be'eri, for example, where I went on, I think, the 9th of October, still bodies and body parts laying around on the ground and things like that. I remember talking to the commander of the rescue unit that went in as soon as they had killed off enough of the terrorists that had taken over Be'eri in order for them to go in and try to rescue people. And he was showing me pictures on his phone of a baby that they pulled out of an oven and of a mother who had had her breasts cut off, and these bodies that they had found where they had herded everybody into a room and then set the room on fire and burned it down. To then go from that, seeing those things, experiencing it, smelling the charred flesh, to having people say that didn't really happen or Israel intended for that to happen, all these conspiracy theories that came out, it's actually pretty maddening. It makes you want to punch somebody when you hear people talk like that. And it just shows me that these pundits and podcasters and influencers and stuff who are saying this stuff either are just that stupid and just, they're doing this for the clicks, or they're getting paid to spout that nonsense. And in many cases, it's the latter.
You think someone could really understand this war without seeing it firsthand and being there?
Yeah, I think you could. You just have to listen to the right outlets. You have to uh, do your research. I mean, if you want to understand what this war is like, download the Shofar app on your phone that will alert you every time there's a air raid or something uh, on Israel, and just set that up, and your phone's going to be going all day long, and that'll give you a sense for what it's like living there. That'll give you an idea. There are live webcams that you can pull up from Jaffa Street and from the old city and from places like that, where you can see people going about their daily lives and get a sense for what's really happening. And I think that, we all need to be a little more critical in our thinking, that when we hear something that kind of blows up the mainstream narrative, there's a real sort of desire by some people for that stuff to be true, to be able to claim that I have special knowledge. I figured it out. Nobody else did, but I figured it out. And there's this shadowy cabal of evil Jews who are orchestrating all this stuff and want this stuff, all that kind of garbage that you hear. There are people out there who have for whatever reason, deep desire to believe things like that. But if you're a reasonable person and you're hearing stuff like this, you need to kind of just ask yourself, does it pass what do they call Occam's razor? The simplest answer is usually the right one. So if you got to come up with some convoluted conspiracy theory, it's not the simplest answer. And the simplest answer is that Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, killed a bunch of people, and Israel has been trying to make itself safe ever since. I think you start there, and then if something disagrees with that, you just kind of have to ask yourself, how likely is it that is the truth?
And you've described a disturbing trend on the right, which has gotten stronger. Why are some conservatives now turning on Israel? We see a lot of Tucker talking about Israel all the time. Candace Owens.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I mean, like I say, they're getting paid to do that. I just did a video on it that you go through Ben Swan, and it's been proven that he's making money being paid by RT, Russia Today. And so it's not surprising that he's got the ideas that he does, or that he's spouting the information that he is. Same thing with Tucker, same thing with Candace. There may not be any hard proof that Tucker is getting, you know, his marching orders from Russia or the Qatar, but it doesn't really matter. They're selling the same product, so that's all you need to know. If you look at what the Russians are saying, and you look at what the Iranians are saying, and you look at what Tucker Carlson is saying, if they're all the same, they're selling the same product, whether or not he's getting paid to do it. And he is getting paid. There's no two ways about it. I mean, you look at the number of views he gets when he puts out something like that, just based on what I know about YouTube, he's making a couple $1 million a month, most likely, just from the views. So there's a real profit motive there. But I think there's also there's got to be more than that, because I don't really believe Tucker Carlson is in it just for the money. I think there's an element of depravity there. What I mean is, the Bible talks about depravity is when somebody denies God, that he turns them over to a depraved mind. And what is wrong looks right to them. What's right looks wrong to them. Like their whole moral compass gets inverted. And I think that there has been an element of that that's taken hold among some of these conservative influencers. So for some, it's money. For others, they really believe the stuff they're saying, but it doesn't make any sense. And that is what tells you that they're depraved. Because if it is easily disproven, but they keep saying it. So like they keep talking about the Israeli attack on the USS Liberty, 70 years ago or whatever it was. And there's plenty of information out there that will disprove their claims if you're willing to look for it. So if it's easily disproven, but they keep spouting that stuff, then there's got the only, to me, explanation is that they're depraved.
You think Tucker is trying to get, Christian Zionists to turn on Israel, saying that Christians are persecuted in Israel, or he said explicitly that he doesn't like Christian Zionists, and how he debates with Mike Huckabee and what he said about Ted Cruz. It's just, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, if he's trying to change the minds of Christian Zionists, I don't know that saying that he despises them more than Islamic terrorists is the right way to go about doing that. I think that he despises them so much because they destroy his arguments. When you watch the interviews that Ted Cruz and Mike Huckabee have done with Tucker, as far as I'm concerned, they wipe the floor with him. And he has to fall back on his, kind of stupid laugh and these gotcha questions that he keeps throwing out there. I think that's why he hates us. And I think we don't really care that much. He can hate us if he wants. But look, truth is not a flavor of ice cream. Truth is something that exists outside of what you think about it. It's more like insulin. It's like life or death, right? You don't get to just choose your version of truth. You can try, but that makes you a worldview self-contradictory, because if you believe you can just choose whatever truth you like, then it's like you're saying it's objectively true that there is no objective truth. And it's an argument that commits suicide. So, I mean, I think that when somebody gets to the point where they accept that premise, that truth, this is my truth, I own it, right? Instead of it existing outside of me and it's not subject to my opinion. So if they say, no, truth is whatever I think it is, they don't understand this, but what they're actually saying is that I believe it's true that there is no truth. And when you believe a self-contradictory worldview, you can believe anything. You can believe that men can have babies. You can believe, anything. And that's, I think, the mental sickness that we see that's been a part of the hard left for a long time. But again, as these people on the right go so far right that they come back around. And I do want to say, I think part of the reason why we've seen people on the right throwing the ball over the fence and, spouting stuff that normally is in the domain of the left is that a lot of American conservatives lost all faith in government during that time. especially after seeing the draconian measures that many governments took to try to put a stop to it. Many Americans, myself included, were absolutely appalled at what Israel did to its citizens, at the way that they handled it. That doesn't square with our understanding of individual liberty, forcing people to get medical treatments they didn't want, the masking, the lockdowns, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of American conservatives were so disgusted by Bibi Netanyahu's enthusiastic draconian measures upon his own people. And many of them, of course, not having been to Israel, don't understand that much of Israel is quite a bit more homogenous than the United States in some ways. And so it probably didn't seem as draconian to Israelis as it looked from the outside. But so a lot of conservatives looked at that and just said that, well, Bibi Netanyahu is objectively evil for that one thing alone. Personally, I didn't like Bibi Netanyahu very much either for that, and because of his stance on the Second Amendment, where he thought that, as Israelis, you do not have a right to self protection unless the state grants it to you. And we don't really like to do that, that kind of thing. That doesn't sit well with any red-blooded American who believes in the right to defend himself, believes in the natural right to self-defense. Natural right meaning existing before governments, above governments. So I had a problem with Bibi Netanyahu for that reason as well. So I mean, I think that you've got to be able to hold two things at once if you're going to look at this correctly. Number one, the Israeli government, just like the American government, is not synonymous with the Israeli people or with the Jews writ large, just like the American government is never representative of the entirety of the American people, because we're a very divided culture. And so there can be things that I see our government or your government, from the Israeli side, doing that I heartily disagree with, while at the same time I can see other things that the government or the military over there is doing that I very much agree with. It doesn't have to be binary. It's not a binary choice. And I think that's the big mistake that a lot of people make. America has become so divided between the left and the right that the chasm is insurmountable at this point. We're basically two countries living in the same space, but we can't mix. It's mutually exclusive. So this is why America is, there are a lot of Americans who are just like, no, I am 100% on the side of my tribe, my team, my political party, and 100% against everything that the other team or tribe or political party does. And I think that's pretty, irresponsible and kind of immature, because a mature person understands that because governments are made up of people and people are fallible, that means governments are fallible and they're going to do some things that are right and some things that are wrong. We need to be able to call out the things we see them doing that we think are wrong and praise them for the things that they're doing we think are right, and not have to check first to see if they've got an R or a D behind their name to know if we can actually agree with them or not. Very, very difficult for many people in the United States right now. And so I voted for President Trump and I'm happy with many things that he's done. But I have to say, President Trump has not been helpful in that regard, because he encourages that kind of tribal thinking. And, anybody that doesn't agree with him 100% is not just, misguided or uneducated or underinformed or whatever. No, they're objectively evil. They're terrible human beings because they don't agree with 100% of everything he says. And that is not healthy, but unfortunately our culture is not very healthy right now.
You put up a video about Candace Owens, and the Baal that she was speaking about, and she's constantly pushing these conspiracy theories we see with Erica Kirk, with Israel. I mean, why are people falling for her lies, her conspiracy theories? What is your analysis about that?
Because not enough of us are calling her out on it. I think that's the simple answer. She's able to spout this stuff And there are people who just lap it up because there are not enough competing voices that actually take that. Because I think a lot of people, when somebody says something that crazy, that the Israelis worship the Baal, and uh, they part and parcel of Jewish religion is to murder babies. When somebody says something that stupid, I think a lot of people just blow them off, just go, yeah, I'm not going to listen to her anymore. But I think that's definitely the right thing to do. Certainly don't listen to her anymore. But I think there also needs to be one step further, and that is calling it out every chance you get. And if enough people call her out, it'll overwhelm people's ability to hide in their little lane and not hear those other voices. So we've got to get better at this because, and I think we will. I mean, this is the technologies that we're using to communicate with one another are still fairly in their infancy. And so it's kind of the Wild West when it comes to information. Very little ways to like fact check and things like that. But I think I think AI is going to help a lot in helping to fact check stuff. We're already seeing, I think X does a pretty good job of this, of allowing people who can provide evidence that some claim is right or wrong can put community notes on a post to so that when you read this post, like for example, I was just looking at one that said that the speaker of the parliament in Iran had flown to Pakistan to have negotiations with the United States. And I was like, well, is that true or not? And right underneath that post, there was a community note that said, these pictures are from 2023. And here's the statement that the Speaker of the Parliament made saying he's not having any talks with the United States, et cetera. So you can see the context, and that needs to be spread across the entire internet in some way, shape, or form. Right now, my go-to is Grok. If there's a claim or a news item or a story that comes out, I stick it in there and say, how much of this is true? And it does a pretty good job of researching it and saying, well, here's what's true of that and here's what's not. We just need to be, unfortunately, until better systems are in place to weed out the stuff that's untrue. And really, we have to ask ourselves, how much do we want to filter out stuff that's untrue? Because a lot of people would say, "Oh yeah, absolutely. Let's filter out everything that's not true." I mean, in a free country, in a free society, you should be able to be a Candace Owens and have an opinion, whether or not it's true. If you want to hold to an opinion that you're a purple unicorn, go for it. Just don't ask me to join you in that delusion. That's all. That's true freedom. So I think we will develop tools that'll be able to root this stuff out and find the truth of things more easily. And that's coming. But for the time being, we've got to do the work ourselves.
Chuck, I want to thank you for your time and for not being afraid to speak out on everything, especially Israel. How can people find you if there's anything you want people to know? Uh, Go ahead.
Yeah, just go to my YouTube channel at The Hot Zone with Chuck Holton, and I do daily live broadcasts over there. I've got one coming up in about 7 minutes. And then you can go find me on all the socials. I have a team that posts our stuff over there, or just go to chuckholton.com. And that's kind of where everything gets aggregated.
Thank you, Chuck. Hope to speak to you again soon.
All right. Thank you.